Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. The term coach is more than just a metaphor for leadership. According to Professor Martin Bean, there are countless examples of coaches in elite sport who can guide and mentor individual team members while unlocking the potential of the whole team. The same could be said for great leaders in business. Professor Bean outlines this approach in his new book, Toolkit for Turbulence, the mindset and methods that leaders need to turn adversity to advantage, co-authored by sports psychologist Graham Winter. Chris Ashmore begins by asking Professor Bean why leaders should embrace the role of coach.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Chris, and I'll tell you a little story about how coach came about. So my co-author, Graham Winter, is the 3-time lead psychologist to the Australian Olympic team, but also an A-grade cricketer, and has produced some other work on mindful cricket, where he works with cricket teams all around the world. And when the borders closed during the pandemic, Chris, I was sitting there and I thought to myself, wow, my really well-honed leadership playbook that I'd built over 30 years of leadership that served me so well. My people loved me on my team. The organization was running well. It was put in nice, neat little packages of a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual routine. It was really something I was quite proud of. But then in the blink of an eye, everything changed. And I thought to myself, wow, I am going to have to be the one that adapts here. So I called Graham and we jumped on a Teams meeting, and I said, okay, Graham, if I was leading the Australian Olympic team off to the Olympics as the team manager, or I was leading the Australian Ashes team into England in harm's way for an Ashes tour, what would I be doing differently as a leader? And he paused and he said, well, Martin, the first thing you'd do is you would no longer think of yourself as a manager or even a leader. You'd start thinking of yourself as a coach. And I paused and I thought, okay, so then can you take me through what I would do differently if I woke up every day thinking of myself as coaching my executive team and my broader leadership team, rather than leading or managing them? And that's, Chris, how we came up in the book with Be the Coach Your People Need.
Well, it makes sense using that, I suppose, coach metaphor or analogy to being a leader. But do we place perhaps too much expectation on a coach's shoulders? Do we expect them to have the answers all the time?
And I think you've sort of answered the question in your question, because you're absolutely right. The coach isn't there as the all-knowing, all-being, the sage on the stage. The coach is really there to be the coach on the side. It's actually dialing into every single member of the team and creating the enabling environment to allow them to be the best that they can be, Chris. And it's quite liberating for a lot of leaders to realize that they can be authentic, they can be vulnerable, they can not have all the answers. But at the end of the day, they are setting up the enabling environment. And that was a big part of what I had to learn, was release that pressure of having to know everything and have all the answers, because we couldn't. There was no playbook. There was no tail lights to follow as we headed into this. My job was to recognize that my team had all the answers. We'd figure it out together. But what they needed from me was to create that enabling environment, Chris.
Is there a better way to being a coach?
Yeah, so the 3 things that I'd probably want to highlight for your listeners today is that the first is really putting people first. I know that might sound like, of course we put our people first, but it's really interesting. A lot of managers and leaders don't actually put their people first. They put them second, or worse still, last. I was working with an organization recently that is number 1 worldwide in their category. They're a software services company. They have had a meteoric rise, great market share, incredible growth, but their Achilles heel right now are their engagement scores with their people. So they're doing everything else right, but at the end of the day, their culture is fundamentally broken. Their engagement scores are awful. Their turnover rates are alarmingly high, and they are an organization where they are only as good as their people. And yet I would say they probably put their investors number one, their customers number two, and a very distant third would be their people, which is just so ironic. And so one of the things we talk about in the book is waking up every day, particularly for the team that you lead, first and foremost, thinking about every one of them and just saying, what do they need from me this week? What if every Monday morning, and Graham and I did this, we'd have a meeting on the Friday afternoon, we'd go team member by team member, and we'd literally say, right, what do they each need from me Monday morning? And Monday morning, I would prioritize the first part of my day in reaching out to them to be the coach that they needed. And that had an unbelievable impact on those people in terms of getting them match ready or in the right state of mind. The second one, which comes up all the time now, Chris, is making vulnerability a strength. We interviewed 15 other chief execs or CXOs for the book. And one of the things that we asked them was, what did you learn during COVID that you've kept in your toolkit now? And unprompted, all of them said, be ready to openly and authentically share personal emotions and experiences with others. Look for opportunities to admit your uncertainty, ask for help, take thoughtful risks. Those are all of the things that are coming out. So that's really the second one. And the story we tell in the book, and the story that happened was one of the first things Graham said to me was, Martin, if you were leading that Ashes team, you would need to get into a locker room with those players and level with them about what are the 2, 3, or 4 values that are deeply held within you, that when everything else was stripped away, you will rely upon to get through the adversity. And this was a 2-week process he took me through of reflection. And I checked it with loved ones, people that I respected. He would really press me. The 3 that I came up with, and this is often the case for leaders, went all the way back to my childhood, Chris, when I realized the triggers, and they were care, courage, and mateship. And I got my team in the room literally a couple of days before, we didn't realize it at the time, before we'd all be locked away in Melbourne, and we wouldn't actually be in the same room again for months. And I told my stories around care, courage, and mateship. And as you could imagine, there weren't a lot of dry eyes in the room because we were all pretty raw at that moment in time. But out of that came our North Star on the fact that we were the custodians of RMIT. There were other teams just like us through 2 world wars, through a Great Depression, through the Vietnam War, the suffragette movement, all of this adversity. And there were people just like us that stood up and got the university through it, and we were not going to be the team to let the side down. So that's the second one, making vulnerability a strength. And the third one is, which is linked to the first, is go one-on-one, Chris. Ramp up your one-on-one conversations with your team. And in the book, we talk about fundamentally rewiring the conversation. Most performance conversations or one-on-ones, it's sort of just a laundry list of transactions. Can I get you to decide this? Can I get more money for that? Have you got an idea about this? We believe that every 60 to 90 days, you need to have an ADEP conversation, which is an acronym for restructuring the conversation around what's your team member achieved in the last 60 days that they are most proud of and why? What have they done to develop themselves in the last 60 days? What have they done to enrich themselves or learn more? The E is, what have they enjoyed? What's brought them fun and enjoyment over the last 60 to 90 days? Because in turbulent, tough times, you want to dial into what people are enjoying and feed that. And the final, which is very powerful, is who have they partnered with? Who have they partnered with in the last 60 to 90 days in the team, in the broader organization? And that, of course, opens a door to, and who do you think you should be partnering with to be more effective? Once you've looked back, Chris, it's all about having a plan for the next 60 to 90 days around achieve, develop, enjoy, and partner. And those are sort of the 3 things that we believe are the secret ingredients for being the coach your people need, Chris.
That's terrific stuff. Do you have any examples of who is a good coach, whether that's sport or business or whatever?
Oh, look, Satya Nadella at Microsoft now. I used to work at Microsoft earlier in my career, And, I just look at what he's done for Microsoft, Chris, and how he's transformed that organization since he took the helm. And I think the thing I admire the most, having worked for Microsoft, is he made one really subtle shift in the way people were evaluated and rewarded in Microsoft. In my time, all of the performance management was about rewarding me for what I had done, me as the individual. He came in and said, you cannot get sort of an exceed or exceptional rating in Microsoft any longer unless you can evidence how you have helped others. And that really subtle mind shift from it being, it's all about me, to suddenly it's all about how I can help others to be successful, has made a massive difference in the culture of Microsoft. And I think for anybody tracking their share price, you'll understand that it's done a pretty miraculous thing for their investors, their customers, as well as their people, Chris. So he's sort of a leader that I look at and go, wow, that's just transformative what he's done to the culture of Microsoft.
That was Professor Martin Bean, CEO of the Bean Centre. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more B Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.